So how does somebody get to a point where they can learn to trust what they want again?
Yeah, God, that's such a good question and a lot of layers. So there is always this central question of really either not thinking about or maybe we get so busy that we don't put time and energy into sort of like the what's next. And if we're thinking, and so that seems to be the central question is, I don't know what's next. And so then we stop listening because we get so comfortable in the routine. I think that's really what happens. As humans, we like that sense of security of like, okay, I have a good job. I go and I do the job and I do the mom thing or the parent thing or, all those other obligations. And as stressful and as pulling as those things are, and it oftentimes are uncomfortable, the discomfort of doing anything different is usually like the pain has to be so great to create that change. And then that's why we wake up. So I think that's probably where the biggest resistance comes is we don't challenge ourselves to stretch. I like using the word stretch because it's not like setting goals. It's making sure that we don't get caught in the hamster wheel of the everyday. Even if it's uncomfortable, we stay comfortable because it's familiar. And so we ask ourselves, there's one question, maybe to distill down the answer, if you will, to the question that I regularly ask myself when I feel anything like lack of like being able to kind of balance. At what cost? Like those 3 words I think are very powerful. So it's like, I can keep doing this job, but at what cost? And if you have that honest conversation with yourself of like, internally, you're like, yeah, this job pays me really well, but I'm missing out on my kid's life. I'm putting my health on the back burner. Like, is the job, like, at what cost will I continue this job? And if I'm okay, or if I can figure out a better way to navigate the other things, but at least that sort of like at what cost forces you to really question what you're doing, how long you want to do it for. And if you determine the cost is too great or too painful, then and only then will you start thinking about what the next possibilities are. And I think the at what cost is that gut check.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Life Intended. I'm your host, Kelly Berry. Life Intended is a podcast that explores what it means to be true to yourself and live an authentic and purposeful life. Each episode explores my guest's version of personal growth, self-discovery, and the pursuit of becoming the best version of themselves and how to find the joy in the journey. Today, I'm joined by my very good friend, Lindsay Vastola. I'm really excited for our conversation today. Lindsay is a New York City corporate manager turned entrepreneur on a mission to help success-driven professionals win at work and life as healthy, high achievers. After experiencing the firsthand realities of burnout early in her corporate career, Lindsay took the plunge into entrepreneurship and started her first business, a fitness and wellness company tailored for busy professionals. And that's how our journeys crossed a long time ago. And then after 15 years of coaching thousands of highly driven individuals, many on the brink of burnout, she realized that most don't want work-life balance. What they really want are more effective ways to successfully shoulder the everyday demands of work and life without giving up one for the other. This inspired her second venture, Vast Potential, a professional development company helping businesses and leaders build cultures of healthy, high performance. Lindsay's also a mother, a soon-to-be author, which I'm really excited about. So hi, Lindsay. Thanks for joining today.
Ellie, it's always fun to be with you, whether we're recording it or just catching up. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great. Lindsay and I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago that was probably 2 hours long, and we could have recorded it and turned it into several podcasts. There was a lot of good stuff. So it's always great to talk to you. So that was a lot about you professionally. So tell everybody more about who Lindsay is as a person.
Yeah. So I guess in reverse engineering it, I currently live in Raleigh, North Carolina. We moved with my 2 children. My son is 12 and my daughter is 7. And we moved to Raleigh from New Jersey after being there for 20 years. My husband's originally from there. And it was a good move for us. there was some family, I'm sure many who are listening to this are in that sandwich generation where you have, trying to balance taking care of aging parents and young children. And so that was a good move for us, a big move. That was a pivotal move for our family. By degree, I'm international politics. So I always think it's funny, how many of us go to college for something and end up doing something wildly different. I grew up in Hawaii, so I have kind of that West Coast, born in California, raised in Hawaii, moved to the East Coast for college, and sort of the rest is history. And in the process, going from, working that first career in New York City, learning the ropes of climbing a corporate ladder and the demands professionally and personally, and that was even before kids, then starting a business and going out on my own, and what I learned just in those, thousands of conversations over almost 20 years now, I guess, that, I think in retrospect, I think that's what we'll talk a lot about today is, how those decisions and how that journey really frames and impacts this journey that, 20 years ago, it's so cliche. If somebody said, you'll be sitting in Raleigh, North Carolina, doing podcasts about, work and life and, with somebody you met in the fitness industry, 20 years later, you can't tell that. So, and then all those little lessons you learn along the way, the lessons of being a mom and, navigating relationships and shouldering family burdens and, obligations in your community. So I guess in short, it's almost like, I guess for all of us, right? We're just building the plane as we fly it and we collect experiences along the way. And maybe we can, discuss some of those today. So hope that gives you a little bit of an idea.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. I'm not sure if I knew about the international politics
Oh, you
or
didn't?
I
Yeah.
don't know. That
Yeah.
sounds new to
So
me.
I was your typical high achieving. I was a middle child, but I took on a lot of like firstborn. My brother was born with several health complications, and I think I kind of stepped into that firstborn role quite a bit. I'm a rule follower. I'm a people pleaser. Check all the boxes. Do everything. Class president, captain of all the teams. And when I remember very specifically thinking about, what am I going to major in college? And then, I only applied to the big fancy colleges because that's what Lindsay should do, and really making decisions. I won't say that I didn't really want, but what I thought other people thought that I should do. So international politics sounded really big and important. So I went to Washington, D.C., went to American University, which is a great university. That was a great experience. But I studied Japanese for 8 years. Being in Hawaii, that was like you take Spanish or Japanese. And so took Japanese, ended up living in Japan as part of my college program for about a year and a half, and came back for that last year. But so international politics, my first career was an international translation company. So that fit really well with my language background and, just the international relations. And then very quickly learned that, I don't know if this is really the path I'm supposed to be on.
Yeah.
But so there you go. New fun fact. You didn't know.
Yeah, really. That's awesome. All right. So, you and I know a lot about each other. So I think some of these conversations really fit well with what I'm trying to accomplish on this podcast and living like who you want to be rather than who you think you should be. And so you've already said some things that I think really lend itself to like kicking off the conversation that way. So I was also a high achiever, high performer, and I think I can totally relate to the being not really influenced in your decision making, but probably not making decisions necessarily 100% in alignment with what you want or who you think you want to be, but also very much the who you think that you should be.
Yeah.
So have you been able to overcome that throughout your career, and how has that like influenced how you make decisions now?
I think when I really realized this, and it really wasn't that long ago, was I think intuitively I always realized that was a filter I used was, what are other people going to think about my decision? Does it fit with the perception they have of me? And if I did anything that didn't seem like it matched, that people would question that, and then it would somehow question my abilities or what have you. And the pivotal moment, actually, I don't know if I think you've heard of this. It's Mindset by Carol Dweck.
You have
So it's interesting. This was, after I left my corporate job, which was a huge talk about a decision that I made that I probably prolonged that decision because I was like, well, why would people what are people going to think if I leave this amazing job that pays me well? I'm climbing the ranks. I'm traveling the world. I'm getting this great experience. It seems so stupid. Like, why would Lindsay, that's not a smart move for you to do that. And so I prolonged that again because I thought what other people would perceive of it. And so I read this book, and it's interesting. So I had already started my fitness business, doing a lot of coaching and mindset. That just kind of comes with the territory. And so I always top level understood the idea of the growth mindset versus scarcity mindset, right? No, that's what she calls them. Fixed.
Growth and
Another
fixed, yeah.
different. So she calls it the fixed and the growth mindset. And I would always consider myself, oh yeah, I'm growth mindset. I believe I can achieve anything I put my mind to. I'm absolutely capable. So I never had gaps, if you will, of what I believed I was capable of achieving. Ergo, I just assumed that I was growth mindset. Well, I read this book, and it was almost like I had this mini identity crisis, because when she talked about the fixed mindset, in many ways, my whole life, I've lived by the fixed mindset, because it's almost like, when you're labeled as, well, Lindsay always, Lindsay is smart, Lindsay is a good leader. And so anything I did that didn't look smart or didn't kind of fit those categories, I wouldn't make those decisions. Even though I knew deep down, I was like, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to evolve out of this. But just like leaving my corporate job in New York, that's not a smart move to many people, even though for me, I knew it wasn't there. So when I started looking at my decision making, Lindsay, is this really you? Is this really you? Is this a decision you really, really want? Or are you using other people's or perceptions to cloud that? And I think that a lot of that is just self-reflection, self-awareness, being mindful of how other people even describe you. And that kind of always brought to, it might sound a little bit, what's the word? Not woo-woo, but a little ethereal when we say listen to your gut. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but we always hear listen to your gut, listen to your gut. And it's I would always listen to my gut, but I would usually excuse it away. It's Lindsay, you really need to leave this job, or Lindsay, you need to move on from this business, or you really shouldn't engage in this, quote unquote opportunity. My gut, I was listening to it, but because of my fixed mindset, I would almost excuse it away. Well, Lindsay, it's a good paying job. You really shouldn't leave. What are people going to think? Right. I would excuse it away, and then ultimately come to the same conclusion. It made the decision making so much longer and stressful. I think just undue stress that we put on ourselves. And so it was a couple of years ago, I was talking to somebody, and he said, you know what I've learned? You don't just listen to your gut, you obey your gut. And I was like, wow, to me, that was very profound. That was anytime that little voice is saying something just isn't right here, or you need to move forward on this, or you need to let go of this, obey it and do it. Do your due diligence. You need to question yourself and all that, but compress the time between this is the decision that I believe is right for me and the action you take. And in retrospect, I think I probably would have saved a lot of time, energy, stress, money, had I actually obeyed my gut. So I think now, if you're asking me, okay, well, how do I make decisions differently now? I think I'm much more swifter and trusting of obeying that gut through that lens of Lindsay, the reason you're not doing the things you want to do and need to do is because of that fixed mindset. What you think other people are perceiving of you, coupled with you just need to take action and course correct later. If it turns out to not be the thing, course correct. So I don't know if that was a bit of a long-winded way of answering that question, but those were the two, I think, over the course of, call it 20 years or so, that's made a big difference for me.
So Mindset is one of my favorite books. I recommend it to almost everyone. I think I don't often say everybody should. Like I try not to
Same.
should on anyone. But I think, that's a book parents should read.
Yes. I love that she
Um,
has that section about parenting.
mhm,
And
mhm,
like we say to your kid, oh, you're so smart and it's so well intended. But that's what they told me. And I
yeah.
know subconsciously now I'm saying, well, if this decision doesn't look smart, then I shouldn't do it. It's
Mhm.
really, I agree with you. I think it's a fantastic read for anybody and everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And when I read it the first time, I had the same, it was a pivotal moment in like my self-awareness. It explained so much of how I had been my entire life and the reason that I felt certain ways about certain decisions or kind of like a high achiever that sought out recognition. It's because like when you've only been recognized for outcomes and never really effort, it just changes the way that you approach things. And, I think when I was getting my MBA, it kind of like slapped me in the face. It was like the first time I've been in a room full of people that, I mean, and it sounds like so self centered, or I don't even know how to explain it, but it's like, kind of the first time I was in a room with people who were like a lot smarter than me. And I was like, I didn't know what to
Humbling.
do. I didn't know, like, how do I get from where I am to where they are? And anyway, it was just kind of, it led to a whole lot of like self discovery and coaching moments for
Same.
myself.
Self coaching. Yeah.
Yes, yes. But I think what you were talking about, and like, I think we've been deprogrammed to trust ourselves, to trust our gut. And I know that you work with a lot of women, and, I don't think exclusively women, but a lot of women who probably have been, they struggle with that a lot. So, how does somebody get to a point where they can learn to trust what they want again?
Yeah. God, that's such a good question and a lot of layers. So, actually, it's interesting. I work with kind of an array of ages. So I was just talking to a new client and she's 22 years old, just getting into her career. I happen to coach her mom and her dad who are on the other side, like they're at the peak kind of on the way out.
Mhm.
And it's interesting the similarities whether you're 22 or 52 or 62. There is always this central question of really not either not thinking about or maybe we get so busy that we don't put time and energy into sort of like the what's next. And if we're thinking, and so that seems to be the central question is, I don't know what's next. And so then we stop listening because we get so comfortable in the routine. I think that's really what happens. As humans, we like that sense of security of like, okay, I have a good job. I go and I do the job and I do the mom thing or the parent thing or all those other obligations. And as stressful and as pulling as those things are, and it oftentimes are uncomfortable, the discomfort of doing anything different is usually like the pain has to be so great to create that change. And then that's why we wake up. So that 22-year-old, my hope is that that I can coach her with some of these strategies and things I wish I had at 22 so that I can more quickly evolve or be aware that, oh, yeah, here I am 10, 20, 30 years later, and I'm doing the same thing. I have the same frustrations. Now they're just 30 pounds heavier. Now they're just that much more in debt. That now it's more complicated. And so I think that's probably where the biggest resistance comes is we don't challenge ourselves to stretch. I like using the word stretch because it's not like setting goals. It's making sure that we don't get caught in the hamster wheel of the everyday. Even if it's uncomfortable, we stay comfortable because it's familiar. And so we ask ourselves, there's one question, I maybe to distill down the answer, if you will, to the question that I regularly ask myself when I feel anything like lack of like being able to kind of balance. For those of you listening, I'm doing air quotes like balance work life at what cost? Like those three words I think are very powerful. So it's like I can keep doing this job, but at what cost? And if you have that honest conversation with yourself of like, internally, you're like, yeah, this job pays me really well, but I'm missing out on my kid's life. I'm putting my health on the back burner. Like, is the job, like, at what cost will I continue this job? And if I'm okay, or if I can figure out a better way to navigate the other things, but at least that sort of like at what cost forces you to really question what you're doing, how long you want to do it for. And if you determine the cost is too great or too painful, then and only then will you start thinking about what the next possibilities are. And I think the at what cost is that gut check. Like, that's the
Hmm.
like, okay, yeah, you know what? The reality is I can make all the money in the world. How many of us know people who have a ton of money seemingly, or they seem so, but they're just so unhappy? And that's
Hmm.
probably because they're not really having those honest conversations about at what cost, and make whatever uncomfortable, unnecessary change they probably knew they needed to make all along, just didn't listen.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that the being comfortable is really like a big trigger. I've recently gone through this. I know you and I were talking, and I told you I was like, I kind of feel like I've been going through a midlife crisis in some ways. I'm 42. Things just had felt very comfortable for a long time, but also like uncomfortably comfortable. And I think, like you're describing, like a lot of the things I just try to ignore, or just really, I guess ignore is the best way to describe them, until, like tragedy happened. And then it's like, okay, well, life is really short, and it's, the things that I want are important, and they are okay for me to pursue, or, I'm not comfortable living this life, and now I know I need to make a change. So, what do you see? I think being comfortable, it's hard to feel those triggers that will get you out of it, to even ask the at what cost question. So what can people look for to let them know, like, I might really just be like going with the flow a little bit too much over here. Like, I'm not really like stopping to think about what's going on, or what do I want. So what are triggers that people can feel, or how can they like check in with themselves on those things?
This is going to sound really strange, but I actually think, and I think some of this depends on the personality of the person, but if we're talking to people who, like, I think both you and I believe, whether you believe in God or whatever, like, we're put here for a very specific purpose and intention. I believe that. And I remember very specifically thinking, it was probably right around when I turned 40. I'm not afraid of being 40. Age doesn't, it's never really been one of those things for me. We're like, oh my gosh, I'm 40 or 30, or,
Mhm,
but what it did was it created a sense of urgency inside of me, because I started doing the math. And I was like,
mhm,
oh, like, if 40 years flew by, you can start like just doing the math. And I'm like, so if I realistically, let's call it 40 more years. Wow, I've got to light a fire. There's a lot I can do. There's so much potential. And it sounds so strange, but it's almost like I have to self-inflict urgency. And you have to create something so deep and remind yourself of it consistently. And I think different people are motivated, triggered, whatever word you want to use, by different, like, some are by fear, like, oh my gosh, like, I have to do this, because if I don't, then my kids, my legacy, maybe it's fear that drives you. Or is it the opposite, where it's like, well, I just want to do this? I don't think either is right or wrong, but have that honest conversation with yourself around, like I actually learned, I used to think that I was the one who was like the positive, like, I want to leave a legacy for my children, and I want to, just do good things in this world and make an impact. And I actually found that did not intrinsically motivate me. But I thought that's how I was supposed to do it. I think that's kind of along the lines that they talk about, like, toxic optimism, or what's the
mhm.
phrase they use, right?
Toxic positivity.
Toxic positivity.
Mhm,
It wasn't like, I was like, Lindsay, you can keep like wanting to leave a great legacy and do this for your kids, but it's not spurring you to action. It's not making you do uncomfortable things that you have to do in order to like progress and move. And so for me, I've got a finite period of time, which means every single day I need to do something, or like maybe it's not every day, but like it has to be so top of mind. I almost have to create this sense of urgency. Like, I only have a limited time to do it. Like, I really need to light my fire, like get my fire under my ass and do hard things, And I feel better about myself when I do that.
Mhm.
Like it's so
Right.
backwards, but that's what I mean by like it's like this self-inflicted challenge every day I have to remind myself of. For me, I don't know if you'd call it a mantra or like a belief, I guess, that I repeat to me that kind of stokes this is like I have to bet on myself. Like that's the only that for me, it's like when I say I got to bet on myself, nobody else is going to do the hard work for me. Nobody else is going to come in and do it for me. So if it's me and only me, and I can't rely on anybody else, and I don't mean that in a way that like I believe you absolutely need the right people in your life, but I think for a long time I rested on my laurels thinking that like this community of people were going to help me, see my
Mhm.
potential. But
Mhm.
every day I've got to do the hard things. So that for
Mhm.
me is the way I self-inflict or I self-induce that sense of urgency. Otherwise, I will get complacent. I will get to the like, oh, maybe like tomorrow I'll just get to that hard thing. Ebbs and flows. I'm certainly not sitting here saying that every day I'm at peak performance. I think for
Yeah.
all the reasons, but if I can aim for 70 to 80% of the time that I have disciplines in place that keep me from creating excuses, I use that sort of like bet on me. Nobody else is going to do it for me. There's a timestamp on this. And Lindsay, like you were put here for that to me is the pressure I need. Like, Lindsay, if you don't fulfill what you were put here, like, not that you're a failure, but I'm shortchanging a lot of people. My
Mhm.
family, the people I want to impact, I'm shortchanging them. And that's not
Yeah.
cool. So,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like that self
Yeah.
inflicted? Um,
Yeah.
it's the
And I
only,
think you're right on when you say like everybody needs to figure out what that is for themselves because it is so different.
yeah,
And I think even it evolves, like I think maybe
absolutely.
what would have motivated me 15 years ago is not the same thing that does now. But I also feel that sense of like I had a shift where, I'll say one day it wasn't one day I woke up and everything was
Yeah.
different, but it's just like one day I realized no one's coming to save me. I've had these things on my goal list for years and I just keep rolling them over like somebody's going to come out of thin air and hand these things to me. And that is just not the way life works. And, we in our household, Nick and I, and raising our daughter, we talk a lot about agency, like personal agency and taking a responsibility. And, a lot of kind of what the evolution that I've gone through is realizing that there was a lot of that I hadn't been doing for a long time and how important that is in order to actually make your life the way that you want it to be.
Yes.
And I don't think that I was consciously like sitting on these goals or sitting on these things, being like, well, one day I'm just going to get really lucky and everything's going to happen for me. But that, when I look back, that's kind of exactly what I was doing. Like,
Yeah.
just because you say you want this or you
Yeah.
write it down on a piece of paper, it doesn't make it,
I'll get a
I,
little, can I get a little bit
yeah,
salty for a little bit? Like, I think
yeah.
that, and it's funny, like, I don't know if it was an age thing or just an experience thing. There are things that I believe, I think you said this earlier, like we've been programmed to believe things like work-life balance, self-care, um, this whole notion of manifestation and what's the other one? Like, like manifesting, like just put it out into the universe and it'll come to you. I think that's created there's a very fine line between the essence of what those are supposed to do and creating excuses. It's
Mhm.
like, oh, self-care, right? I've had a really stressful week self-care. And so I'm going to have a glass of wine every night out of self-care. Or like, I'm going to be here lazy for the entire weekend and use self-care or I'm not going to do that hard thing. I'm not going to really challenge myself because like it's such a slippery slope. And I think
Mhm.
with the goals thing, we've kind of been conditioned that like this manifestation and you put out into the universe. That's if I'm being completely honest, I think I rested on that a little bit too. It's like, oh, I just like put it out there and I keep talking about it, even though I was like doing work.
Mhm.
In retrospect, there are things like I was not putting in the amount of work that's required in order to get the return, like to create and generate the opportunities to return like and it requires risk, it requires challenging yourself, doing things that are uncomfortable. But I think that's where like even for high achievers that feel like we're working hard, and we're being productive and we're doing things, are they really stretching us enough and challenging us enough to actually become the person required to achieve those goals? Or are we just checking the boxes like, yeah, we're supposed to make goals, and then somehow they're going to happen if you just work hard in return. And I think there's a lot more intentionality and just like dig your heels in the ground and do some hard things in order to create that. So that's kind of like my salty take, I think, on a lot of these things that have maybe made us into just resting on our laurels a little bit or not challenging ourselves enough. And there's a balance between pushing yourself so hard where now it becomes your self-loathing or you don't see your worth, and the difference between like, no, this is actually how I gain confidence, is by doing hard things and taking risks. And I feel so good when I do those things. And then that's what propels me forward. And that's a skill. I don't know. I mean, who's teaching that? That's the agency part of it,
Right. Yeah. I think that's what you just talked about. I think it's just one of the reasons that we get along so well, because I get salty about all of those things also. And manifestation is a big one. I think it's a misappropriated term.
Great way to
I think, I think that it has a place. And if you actually, like manifest something and then back it up with a plan, like that's goal setting, or that's
totally. It's like creating the vision and then creating a pathway or a journey or like an action plan to get there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm with you there. I think that there's a lot that I see, and this is, it's a whole other topic on its own, but there's so much I see on social media that's geared towards women or geared toward women who are aspiring to be business owners or women who are business owners. There's so many like conflicting messages, and, all you have to do is manifest it, or you don't work so hard or hustle, or, it's like, everywhere you look, somebody's got a message that's like the key to happiness. And I am more like you. Like, I don't believe that there are hacks, and I don't believe that there are like shortcuts. We both come from the fitness world. We both know that like you take a shortcut and it is what it is.
Yep.
And if you're looking for like real fulfillment or real change in your life or real anything, like, it takes work, and anybody who tells you that it doesn't is misleading you.
Agreed.
Period. Yeah.
Having tools, I think that's the shortcut. I think in the blips of social media, I do think, and this is where I get a little bit salty too, I think we're doing a real disservice for ambitious women when we start, the girl boss thing or the side hustle thing. It's like we have an uncanny ability innately, I believe, to like, if there's, and you might not be clear, I think, or you might have clarity of what that is. But if you take agency and personal leadership and you say, you know what, I need to find, like, one of the tool or the topics I always say is so critical is, and I didn't invent it by any means. Who was it? Jim Rohn, the top 5, like, who are you in your circle of 5?
Mm-hmm.
Who are in your circle? Who are you talking to? What are your influences? I don't get clarity when I'm sitting behind my computer or trying to jot down brainstorms on a notepad, like, for days on end. I've tried that, and you just end up hitting your head up against a wall when you're trying to find what I'm supposed to do or get clarity on things. And so whether you're a man or a woman, it's like essentially the same. Like, you've got to put yourself around the right people who know how to ask you the right questions, who can see things in you maybe that you can't see yourself. But that requires getting out from behind the computer or whatever. You can Zoom, but you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, getting out. Mm-hmm. And I think that as I'm saying that, I do think, like, between social media and the new workplace environment where so much, like, you're not having as much water cooler talk, you're not doing the networking. I think what's lost in that, or what ends up happening, is we get a little bit complacent and lazy because we're not forced to have those conversations. We're not put in situations. So we just end up isolated and then lost and then not having clarity. And then we're frustrated. Then we look for the hacks of how to, like, fast track it instead of doing those things that have been proven for however long to really be the keys to clarity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. When you wait too long, when you get to the breaking point, I think that's when you feel like you're like, well, now crap, I don't have time to put in the work. Like I've got to make a change now. And a lot of what my goal is with this podcast is just to bring conversations like this to people who maybe are in a situation where they haven't stopped to think about what they're doing for a while, or they don't realize that they're just going through the motions, go with the flow. They don't realize that the things that they are aspiring to and that they're working for are not even things that they really want.
Yeah.
It's maybe things that they been told that they should want, or
Yeah.
things that like everybody around them wants,
Or
but they
things
haven't
they
really just
wanted
stopped to think.
when we were in our 20s and 30s, and you know what, in our 40s and 50s we don't want them anymore, and that has to be okay. It doesn't mean that it's easy and you can't just like willy-nilly,
Mm-hmm.
But I do think one of the things I talk about that's very powerful for me as like a tool, if you will, is I call it a pattern interrupt. So when you're in this, like where you feel stuck, you're just like doing the mundane, you're on the hamster wheel, you're doing the family thing, you're doing the work thing. And that's the fast track to burnout and depression and all the things, and feeling like you actually don't have aspiration for the future because you've never stoked any. Like if you're seeing the same things all day long, you're thinking the same thoughts, you're seeing the same things, you're around the same people, of course you're not going to like magically come up with this creative idea. So I call it a pattern interrupt, and it can come in like I suggest like one of three ways. Pattern interrupt can be environmental. I think is the biggest one. So this can happen like moment to moment or in a bigger picture. So great example is I work from home, literally looking across and I see like laundry over here, like, but this is supposed to be my work creative space, and I know like I'm creatively stifled here, so I can force my brain to like be creative, and it's just not going to work. I can't will myself to that. And so a pattern interrupt, an environmental pattern interrupt is like I go to a coffee shop or a co-working space. And I can do that for one day for a couple of hours, stoke creativity because it's in a new environment. And then it helps me feel momentum. I think momentum that's why I have a program called Momentum. Like
Mm-hmm.
that word, that's actually what most of us crave. We crave momentum. Like we're moving forward. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, but it's forward nonetheless. When we feel stuck is where we're unhappy and we question everything. And so that pattern interrupt, or it's like, that's why vacations feel so good, because you're going to a new place and you come back. Go to a conference and come back. Go to a networking event, like go to dinner with friends. That's a pattern interrupt. A people pattern interrupt. That's our conversations that we just do every couple months or whatever. That's a pattern interrupt for me, right? We can have different conversations. It takes me out of the mundane, gets my brain thinking about other things. And then like an intellectual pattern interrupt, and that can be reading something, listening to a podcast. And again, this can happen in like, okay, I'm stuck at my computer, or I'm stuck with the same routine with the kids. You know what? I'm going to spend 5 minutes and I'm going to listen to a motivational, YouTube video or something. Like such a little thing, that pattern interrupt. And it doesn't have to be a big yoga retreat. It can be, but these things, having a new person, hiring a coach, putting yourself in a new circle of people, that's the only thing that I find that gets us out of that pattern of stuckness and frustration. You have to change the direction of the turnstile, in order to create momentum.
Yeah, totally. So I think of a couple of things that relate to that. One is, and it kind of goes back to those like salty things that we see, and like a way to handle that. What I see when I'm like, looking at social media, or even looking at LinkedIn to an extent, the same people are following the same people and are doing the same things, and they're not looking outside of their circle for influence from any other place. And I think that that's dangerous. I think it's and not dangerous in a like bodily harm way necessarily, but it's dangerous because you get into like groupthink. You're not thinking like an individual. And so I see that a lot. And so when I find myself like always like hearing or seeing things from the same sources, I will like intentionally go out and start seeking new people to follow or
Yeah.
new thought leaders or read a new book or even read a book or mostly these days like listen to a very short podcast because who has time to read books?
While you're eating your bonbons and watching Lifetime
Right.
movies.
Right. Because with a toddler, you have all
Yeah.
kinds of time to
Yeah.
read books. Paper books around here,
Get
don't
chewed
last
on
any
and
time.
thrown in the a couple
Yeah.
of months ago, I was one of the groups that I'm in. Jeff Hoffman was the speaker, and he's the founder of Priceline.com and like several other companies. He's a billionaire with a B and phenomenal human being. And it was an incredible experience. And he talked about, because I had asked the question, I'm always so curious and fascinated about what we would call these like super successful entrepreneurs or, business owners or these people. Like, how do they look at the world? Like when they're walking around, just like we do, how do they look at the world? Like what questions are they asking? Or if we're looking at the same storefront, are they looking at it differently than we are? Like how do they ideate things? And he said one thing that's been really helpful for him is every day, or whatever, I think every day or every week or something, he will intentionally pick up a magazine that's like totally off the cuff. Like he would never, like if he's in the travel industry, he would pick up a magazine from, from the auto mechanic and like, body shop world, right? And he would just like thumb through the magazine or the book, like if he's in an airport and just thumb through like just something that's totally unrelated. And to your point, where if you're in an industry or you're in a job or you're in a community, so even if you're not working or like you're going to group think the people that those influences you're around. And so picking up, a book, a magazine, or going to a conference or an event that isn't in your industry by any means, talking to people. And he would do this very intentionally. And he said he got some of the best inspiration and best ideas by going outside of his bubble of his industry. And if we are to be honest, he was like basically driving the travel industry with Priceline.com in many respects. And so, and he said by doing that, it kept his ideas fresh. That's how he stayed in front for so long. It inspired new business ideas. It inspired things he could come back and do with his teams for him personally. So I love that. I try to do that as often as possible, as just, yeah, if I'm like in a Barnes and Noble and my kids are, I gotta wait for them, like I'll just go and pick up the magazine rack or at the grocery store when you're in line, like things you would never pick up and read. I think that's important for us intellectually to just keep those, like think of children, they're always absorbing everything. And if we think about what we're absorbing every day, it's the same media from the same people for the same topics. And I think it's important for our personal growth and just our personal sanity that we feel like we're not stuck in that bubble.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I'm a person, I think you're a person who likes to think about how we think about things.
Yes.
And
maybe to our own detriment sometimes.
Right. And when you're talking about like, I wonder how these people see the world. Like, I wonder everything about everybody all the time. Like, how are these people making decisions?
Yeah.
When somebody, I think this is something I think about all the time. When somebody says, or they make a Facebook post that says like, I love my husband so much. He makes me a better person. I'm like, I want to know, how does he make you a better person? Like in other marriages, like how do they make each other better? Are they actually making each other better? Or is that something that they hear other people say or think that they have to say? I'm always wondering about, like other people's friendships. Like, are they challenging each other? Are they helping each other grow? Or are they just like, cheerleaders? And I don't think any of those things are right or wrong. I'm always just like very curious about like what is going on and how are people thinking about it and how are they making all of these decisions in their everyday life.
And then selfishly, how can I use it to integrate into my life or just take it and like put it in the back pocket?
Yeah, exactly. Like how are they raising their kids? What kind of conversations are people having about how to raise their kids? Are they talking about it? are the things that they're doing intentional? Like a big thing with this podcast is like how to be intentional and be purposeful. And so I'm just always very, very curious, like what goes into the decisions that people are making, personal career,
Yeah.
parenting,
And I
everything.
think it's such an interesting two-sided, like two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, it's being intentional, right? Having ideally some clear North Star of your life. And maybe it doesn't even mean having like a career goal or financial or like what, but just like what kind of person do you want to show up in this world?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that one side of intentionality and clear vision. But on the flip side, it's like, I'm also building this plane as I fly it, like building
Mm-hmm.
this plane of life. It's like parenting. It's like as many books as you read and as much advice, it's like moment to moment, I'm just building this plane as I'm flying it. And that gives me grace. For some reason, that phrase gives me grace. I say it in my business all the time. Like, I'm just building this plane as I fly it. Like, I don't know what I'm doing a lot of the time, but I have to fly it. And then I'm going to fix the thing as I go. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I know what I know. I'm going to leverage that. But then just gives me grace to not wait. I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's like, you got to fly the plane. It's like the Freddy fire aim, kind
Mm-hmm.
of the same concept. It's like,
Yep.
you're never ready to have a preteen, but the preteen is coming. So you got to make yourself ready for it. So
Yeah.
that's such
Yeah.
a great, as I think about it, like parenting is such a great analogy for keeping up with life. It's like, I can wish my kid doesn't become a preteen, but no, he's a preteen and he's fussing about his hair this morning. And it's a very real thing. And it challenges me to be, how am I going to show up as a parent and act medium and not be super emotional? Be like, just suck it up
Mm-hmm.
and be patient. It's not a big deal. To him, it's a big deal. But in the
Right.
moment, it's like, I've got to learn this lesson as I'm building this plane. That gives me some grace, I think. And
Yeah.
hopefully that might for others, that it's like, we don't have it all figured out.
Yeah. I
Have the
think that's,
intentionality, but build the plane,
yeah.
fly it.
Yeah. And I think that is a super important highlight from what you were just talking about is because I think this is something else that really holds people back is like perfectionism or thinking they have to have it all figured out before they take the first step. I think it's extremely admirable to have like a mantra like that. Like I'm building the plane as I fly it, because if you wait until the plane is built, you're
Be
gonna
dead.
miss out. Your mind will have changed. Like
Yes.
you miss the opportunity. So there's a whole lot to be said about
Yes.
just like whether it's like the confidence to do it or whether it's just you get to a point where like the at what cost is too great to sit and wait around
Without
for
a doubt.
everything to be perfect before you take the next step.
A couple other sort of, again, I call them a mantra, what have you. These are like those little these things that I need to lean on so that I can self-inflict. That's what, like, I keep coming back to. It's like, if I have to light the fire of, like, I have to light my own fire, I can't rely on external motivation. Like, motivation isn't just this flip that, or switch that we can flip. For me, it's like, okay, I'm building the plane as I'm flying it. If I find myself stewing over something because I want it to be perfect, I mean, I have standards. So it's different, like, have standards without a doubt. But I know sometimes those standards have just been absolutely ridiculous, that now I'm compromising getting it done, and then I don't do it. And then you fall into the confidence trap. Is, really thinking about the, like, done is better than perfect. Done is
Mhm.
better than perfect. Or like, do it anyway. That's another mantra I love. It's like, there's a lot of things that we don't want to do. How many of us really want to do dishes at the end of the night? But you know what I hate
Mhm.
more? Waking up the next morning to a sink full of dishes. So for however long, I was like, when you start, you're a homeowner or you get your first place, and it's like, I hate dirty dishes in the morning. I hate them. The pain is bad enough. I hate it so much that I tell myself, oh, I know you're so tired. You just want to go to bed, but just do it anyway. You're going to feel
Mhm.
better in the morning. That can be relevant across so many things. It's like, just do the thing. It doesn't have to look perfect, but you're going to feel better just by the sheer act of doing it. And the more you practice it, now you don't have to, like, argue with yourself at night to do the dishes on most nights. because it's become a discipline, and we just lack the
Hmm.
discipline of doing because we get so caught up in external pressures, what we think other people. That's a big one that I still grapple with. I think I'm better and better, but really releasing external. We were talking about that mindset, that fixed mindset of, what are
Hmm.
other people going to think of me? And the fact of the matter is, most people aren't even thinking about me.
Yeah.
They're not. Like, who am
Yeah.
I to think that all these people are really caring about what I do?
Hmm.
Um, and I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek, but that's the way I have to be like, okay, just put the post up or go do the thing that feels uncomfortable. And then you move through it, and you put that coin in the confidence bank because you just did the promise that you said you were going to do, you miss
Yeah.
out on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So much good stuff in there in what you just said. Yeah, I think taking the first step will give you the confidence to take the second step, and that'll give you the confidence to take the third step. So those actions just build on each other. You'll then have a self-propelled ship
Yeah.
that'll keep you going. And I think that's really important too. Something else that you said you didn't explicitly say, but I think, with age comes confidence and, regaining that trust in yourself, that you can
Yeah.
trust yourself to make good decisions, that you trust when you know what to do or how to do something. So not saying like, just wait, things will get easier with time, but those are things that you can work on and develop.
Yeah.
And every step that you take in the right direction is just continuing to build that muscle of decision making or
Yeah.
action or whatever it may be
Yeah,
to
and
get
I
where you
know
want to
we
go.
probably need to wrap up, but I think that it's actually a really important piece. What I see over and over and over again and experience personally is it's so fascinating with men and women. We often have this gap. Like I see these men and women who are like ferociously competent and confident in their professional life. And they show up and especially with age, right? You get more confidence as you grow and build. But yet in their personal life, they're almost like little kids. The confidence, and usually it's because they've put their health and well-being on the back burner. And so they've gained weight and they're not showing up for themselves personally. And there's a lot of reasoning we can go into, where like usually the professional piece, there's way too much skin in the game, obvious skin in the game, financial, your credibility, all, like you have to go to work and you have to do the things you have to do to get the job done. And the skin in the game and the personal side, it's definitely there, but we don't put the same emphasis on it. Because we keep thinking like, oh, I can start working out next week. I can eat better next week. And then now we don't feel good about ourselves. And so this gap is huge. And what happens is then we go and when we're talking about trusting ourselves, so we trust ourselves in our decisions often professionally as we get older and we're more confident there. Yet our confidence in our physical health and well-being, usually I find is like at a peak, probably before kids, before the stressors of like life and career hit. And so what happens is, if we're talking about confidence, how to build that side so that they match, so that they actually level up both.
Really.
I think it's Ed Milet says it or what have you, but it's like confidence only happens when you keep the promises you make to yourself. And the analogy I use, it's like if I tell my daughter, hey, I'll take you to the park tomorrow. And darn well those kids remember those details. and then you don't take her, and then I don't take her to the park. Well, mom, you said you were going to take me to the park. I know, but we're busy. Okay. That like it's chipping away at her trust in me, her confidence in
Hmm.
me. Every time I make a promise to her and I don't keep it, I know. And the most painful thing a parent can hear is like, you always tell me you're going to do something and then you never do it. And like, they'll explicitly, like, I can't trust you anymore. Like, my daughter actually said that to me. Like, I can't trust you. And I was like, oh, that's right to the heart. And so what do? We're very careful with the promises we make to our kids, to our family, to our coworkers, because we want that trust with them.
Hmm.
And so we really think about the promises we make. Most of us don't have that same intentionality with the promises we make to ourselves. So we're like, I'm going to go back and work out tomorrow. I'm going to lose weight this time. I'm going to, finally save money. I'm going to make those phone calls to the people I care about. And then we don't do it and we don't do it and we don't do it. And so we don't trust ourselves and we don't
Hmm.
have confidence. And so if we start being really cautious about the promises that we're making. I'll use exercise as an example because I think everybody can relate to this. We go from like 0 to 100, like I'm going to go exercise every day for an hour. I'm going to go back to the gym. Well, you know damn well that that is not a promise you're going to be able to keep to yourself. So why don't you start with like a 20-minute walk 3 days a week? You're going to get every time you do that, you're going to get the feel good factor of like, I kept the promise. And then you build from there. Like it doesn't go 0 to 100. You don't get the full piggy bank first. And so I think that that's something we really need to carefully consider when it comes to confidence and making change and trusting our own decisions. Is like, you have to build the trust with yourself, just like you build the trust. And the way you do it is you keep the promises you make to yourself. So you're really careful with the promises you make. And I think over time, that confidence and that trust grows to match that, especially that professional side as we get older.
Yeah, I love that. I do think we need to wrap up, but I could talk about like consistency and commitment and all of those things.
We just don't do a lot of the things we do for other people. Like if we just stepped outside of ourselves and treated, and it's so cliche, I know it's easier said than done. But if we had honest conversations with ourselves and we're like, what would I do? How would I show up for myself the same way I do for them and not feel guilty about it? Like it's actually required. Like I need to do that first so that I can show up for other people and not be, I can show up for my kids, but I'm going to be short-tempered and angry and like depressed. Like that's not who I want to be. So catch-22. It's hard.
So much good stuff, Lindsay. So much good stuff. Well, I do have kind of a surprise I didn't tell you about, but I have some end of the podcast questions.
Oh, you didn't tell me about these.
I know I didn't tell you. I like, spontaneity.
I love it.
So, 2 questions. What is one thing, personally or professionally, that you would like to accomplish this year?
Oh, okay. Professionally, I want to impact 10,000 lives. Like that's been, so whether it's through my speaking or my books or like 10,000 is that number for me.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I need to
How are you doing so
marker on it. I literally last night I was thinking, I'm like, I actually need to track this because it's a promise I made to myself. So I need to track it. Yeah. But that for me is a big one this year. That would feel really good.
Yeah. Well, we just need this podcast to go viral, and then
there you go. Get me 9,999, and you could be the 2,000.
Yeah. And then the final question is, how do you recharge?
Oh, good question. Oh, such a good question. Okay. I recharge, in a big way, like in a 9 to, it's literally leaving. Like I travel, occasionally for work, and that's a recharge. Now I can't do that like just on a whim. I have a family and all those things. So that's important. A daily recharge for me, honestly, is my first thing in the morning gym. And sometimes like it's almost necessary for me to do, that's my recharge. It wasn't always, interestingly enough, but it's the one thing I look forward to. It sets the tone for the day. So that's something I do, I think, on a daily basis. And I'd say if there's anything else too, it's just like quiet time. I love quiet time, like going to a coffee shop and like, even if it's work, for me, work is fuel for me. So for some people it might just be going and like reading a book or something. But for me, work is recharge, like certain aspects of my work. So going to a new place, like a coffee shop or something, like I recharge alone.
Yeah. I recharge alone also.
Yeah.
Really good stuff. So much value in there, and so many really, which I knew you'd bring. So I'm glad that you did, was like tangible things that people can do, think about, apply. And it's really, that's why I'm doing this. And
it's amazing.
Talking with people like you, it's so much wisdom, and that can really impact, just the way people are living. And
I know what you're doing is going to have such a meaningful impact on so many, and so many people need it. So many people are craving this kind of discussion.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And have a good rest of your day.
You too.
And we'll talk later.
Okay.
Bye. Bye. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. It's truly an honor to help bring these conversations to you. I do have a couple of quick favors to ask of you. While you're listening to an episode, could you take a screenshot and post that to your Instagram stories and tag me at Life Intended Podcast? And just let me know what your favorite takeaways were or what you liked about the episode. It really helps me to learn more about what you love and want to see more of. And if you have a few extra minutes, if you'd go to iTunes or wherever you listen, I'd love it if you could leave me a rating and review. Ratings and reviews are one of the best ways new listeners can find the show, and I'd love nothing more to grow this and help more people live a life intended. See you again here next week.